Annyeonghaseyo. Hey, thank you everyone for joining us here at the virtual dojo here on Maui. Curtis Sensei asked me to do a class concerning the Ki Aikido on Maui training manual. This is the new edition that just came out. It's offered both on Amazon in print form as well as ebook. So if you haven't got your copy, you can surely get one now. This book started back in 1982. Yeah, 1982, June. This is the very first, I get it right in the camera here, the very first manual. And, it started out as just kind of a little gathering of facts that Suzuki Sensei or Curtis Sensei had learned from Suzuki Sensei. And the etiquette started on page 29 and was exactly 3 pages long. It even has really nice drawings, as you can see, of how to place your slippers on the mat. Then it expanded into the manual that I first saw back in 1995. This manual here, Ki Aikido on Maui, it grew from being roughly, I think, this first manual was 70 pages to roughly 190 pages or 180 pages. Yeah, 180 pages. This manual here. And the etiquette increased quite extensively from starting on page 25 to page 35. So it grew exponentially in just the etiquette and the information provided. And then again, this was 1995 that it transpired. In 2000, the grand opening of the dojo here on Maui, they did another edition. And this edition was what many of you know, and recently was our last training manual, which has a great picture of Suzuki Sensei doing kokyodosa with one of the children. And the etiquette was refined, starting on page 29, actually 26, and moving, over 10 pages long. To what it is now, Curtis Sensei completely revised this. This is the new manual here. Completely revised it, taking out some things, rewriting some things, adding and deleting. And that's why he wanted me to go over this, is because, etiquette is super important. Before this manual, there was basically, it was all word of mouth. You learn from your senpai on how to be around the dojo. And a lot of you knew Suzuki Sensei, knew he had a green Bible that Curtis Sensei now possesses, and it had lots of things that this book currently has. And the changes in this manual are, it's a little bit rewritten. One of the changes I always wanted to have Sensei do, which he did, was back in the day when he wrote the meaning of Aikido, but he renamed it in this new manual, called it the Human Universe. It was on the, right here, on the flap. And he'd always start a seminar, if you know Curtis Sensei, he would start a seminar with a question. And a lot of times that question would be, what are the 3 principles of the universe, fellas? And everyone would be like, I don't know. And they were right there in the little flap of the last manual, where it explained Toy Sensei's 3 principles of the universe. Well, now in this new edition, it's actually the opening, of the new book, which I will not go into, because when Curtis Sensei had the meeting with me, he said, don't cover everything in the manual, because I want to do that. And I said, okay, Sensei, no problem. We'll start with etiquette. I probably won't leave that chapter. But chapter 1, etiquette, I always, I teach the introductory course here in Maui, and I always lead with with etiquette, because it was so important to not only Curtis Sensei, but to Suzuki Sensei. And, I was talking with one of our senior teachers, Melly Stokesbury, this afternoon, because in the old brochure that Suzuki Sensei signed had a list of etiquette that's since been replaced by Curtis Sensei. But, you know, I distinctly remember Suzuki Sensei telling us, you know, fellas, when I started Aikido, there were no books, there were no videos, there were no computers. It was basically Toy Sensei would come, give a class, and they'd have to learn it. You know, and I remember Suzuki Sensei saying that, you know, I had to learn 50 techniques. I had to learn 50 techniques when I started Aikido, because we knew if we didn't learn these 50 techniques, you know, when Toy Sensei left, we would be lost, you know, so he had to completely memorize these 50 techniques back in 1953, you know, to basically teach training. Because when he was here, you know, he basically said, Suzuki Sensei, you're the man. You're the guy that's going to teach Aikido after I leave, you know. So Suzuki Sensei remembered, you know, that was so important that he wrote out a list of etiquette, you know, that Toy Sensei had taught him. And, you know, I'll just read you the last paragraph, because I found it so intriguing, because, you know, Suzuki Sensei studied with O Sensei, and he said that when he was training with O Sensei at Hombu Dojo in Tokyo, that O Sensei used to get him in his office. They talk. Of course, O Sensei spoke only Japanese, and Suzuki Sensei couldn't quite understand everything he said, but he understood enough. And the last paragraph in our old brochure used to say, as you train in Aikido, hopefully you will begin to understand more deeply how important a part etiquette plays in your training. O Sensei, the founder of modern Aikido, once said, the training of Aikido begins and ends with the word courtesy. You know, if you just think about that courtesy, just be kind, you know, especially in this day and age when we're faced with right now a pandemic and restricted to our homes. A lot of you probably have, you know, you're living on Zoom or some sort of video conferencing, either for work or just to hang out with your friends. You know, we tend to get sucked into, you know, just how bad it is for us when it can always be worse. So with that being said, you know, to set the foundation, I wanted to go over etiquette, but I also want to give you guys a chance to interact with me and talk. So be prepared. I might call on you and ask you to share a bit about your experiences with etiquette, you know, how you came across Aikido etiquette for you. The only thing I ask is write your question or write your statement down. Try to get it in within a sentence or two. I don't want long paragraphs here. Just to give you an idea, so that way we can kind of move through different items that I have selected to talk about. But, you know, first off, I'd like to ask Melly. You know, Melly started Aikido way before I did, and she knew Suzuki Sensei quite a bit longer. But Melly, do you have a story you could share with us about etiquette and Suzuki Sensei?
Oh, I need to think about that a little bit longer.
I can come back to you.
Could I have a little time to think about that?
Okay, I'll give you some time.
Okay.
So let me call on Sayaka. Sayaka, can you tell us about etiquette in training in Japan with Toy Sensei? Ooh, I'm putting you on the spot.
The etiquette, it's mostly common sense for Japanese people, like bow when you go into the dojo, greet the sensei, and we couldn't change to dogi or hakama on the tatami. It's always outside. it was really strict.
Right. Right.
But
Thank you, Samantha.
pretty much
You know,
same
go
with
ahead.
pretty much same with Maoiki Aikido. It's really similar.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you know, we do change a lot into our hakumas on the mat in Maui, and that's, I think that dates back because the changing rooms in the old dojo was like a cellar. They were really small and they were kind of damp, and yeah, it was really tight quarters. So everyone would come up onto the mat and change into their hakama. And that's kind of how that kind of transpired. Of course, we really don't have to do that now, but since it's kind of ingrained from the old dojo, we still do that. That's a good point. Common sense, you know, the old manual, you know, the very first manual that I showed you guys is actually, you know, the etiquette section starts on page 29, and it's only 3 pages long, you know, and it's basically bowing, when to bow, and dojo etiquette. There's 36 pointers. And then in the next manual, it's bowing, and there's 6 pointers. They've added a point on bowing. There's on the mat, preparing for training, and then in and around the dojo. You know, and if you have the manual, you can go through and look at it, but going from bowing to on the mat to preparing for training. I asked Sensei, I said, Sensei, shouldn't it, you know, this morning I said, Sensei, shouldn't it be bowing, preparing for training, on the mat, and then on and around the dojo? And he went, holy smokes, you're right. I can't believe we've edited that book 3 times and not changed that. But I think Suzuki Sensei had a reason. I just can't remember. So that, I find that fascinating because, you know, bowing is being super important, you know, and in this day and age where we can't shake hands, and Japanese being really into bowing on how to connect. And that brings up another point Sayaka said of greeting the sensei. And I also pointed it out to Sensei that in the section on the mat, he has a point on greeting the sensei. And then if you go to preparing for training, greeting the sensei. So why do you think, you know, he's got it in 2 sections in the new manual? Greet the sensei, and then again, on preparing for training, greet the sensei. And maybe if I could call on Fincher, why, in your aspect, in your experience of training, why do you think Curtis Sensei made it so important to point out in 2 separate paragraphs, greet the sensei?
That's a good question. Well, I think it starts the training because one of the things you do, or well, we're told to
It's
do.
a little hard to hear you, Fincher. You can speak up.
So one of the things we're told to do in training is when we come into the dojo, we basically leave the world behind. And I think that's one of the things. And so when you come and you bow to your sensei, that begins the evening of training. It also, I think, sets your mind. I don't know, this is my personal opinion. It sets your mind to train. And
Okay.
it's, I mean, it's sort of like when we bow in and we bow into the dojo, we bow to the sensei, we bow into the mat, we bow to the shokushu. You know, it's really, in my mind, setting your mind properly.
Right. I agree with you, Fincher. You know, when you come into the dojo, you're bowing to kind of, you know, free your mind, to basically empty your cup. And then from there, you're greeting the sensei. And to think about it, when you greet the sensei, that is your first chance to connect with another person. Your first chance. Not only you bow when you come into the dojo, but to connect with your teacher is the next thing you want to do. And when I remember one time I was sitting in Sensei's office, and Warren Gibson was an old-time student in Maui, and he came in, bowed, and he kind of just bowed and left, didn't say anything. And I looked at Sensei and I said, you know, Sensei, because I never would bow when I'd go in the office. And I would come in and greet him, but I would never bow at the door. I never did that for the longest period of time. And I said, you see, Sensei, I said, you know, Warren just did a really good bow there. It was a really connected bow. I could tell he was really connected. And I said, you probably noticed, Sensei, I don't bow when I come into the office. And he kind of laughed and he said, yes, I know, you don't do that. And I said, well, that's because I just don't feel connected yet to you. When I sit down to you and when I say hello to you, that's when I feel connected. Not about the bow. He said, oh, you should think about that. You know, that's something for you to think about. That's something you should do. But I didn't do it because I felt insincere. So when I felt insincere about doing it, I just didn't do it. And of course, you know, Sensei didn't tell me to do it. He didn't want me to do it. But he waited for it to kind of naturally arise in me. That, oh yeah, that's when I felt most connected to him. Okay, I did it, but I didn't feel connected, so I didn't. So, you know, he let me kind of develop that on my own. And I appreciate that for him. You know, it's kind of like when I would walk in the dojo into the office and say, and when Suzuki Sensei was alive, the desk in the office, your back was to the door. So you actually had to walk in and go to the front of the desk to be able to bow to Suzuki Sensei when I first got there. And Suzuki Sensei would always say the same thing to me when I walked in the office. He'd look at me and go, so, what's new? Every time, I kid you not, he would always ask me, what's new? I go, oh, well, Sensei, you know, not much. But he wasn't asking me what's new in my life. He was asking me what's new in my training. But I didn't get it. I had no clue what he was asking me. Not till later on, and I went, oh yeah, he didn't care what's going on in my life. He wanted to know what's going on in my training. And I didn't figure that out until just recently when I was thinking about it, going, oh yeah, what's new? That's what he used to say to me every time. But anyways, did I digress? Melly had raised her hand. I haven't forgotten, Melly. What do you have for us?
Can you hear
There
me?
you are. Yep, we can hear you. Oh, you're mute now. Now you're up. You're good.
Okay. I'm pressing my space bar to make that work. Well, I'm just thinking about how the kids, I'm always telling the kids every year and sometimes many times during the year, remember to greet the sensei. Greet me when you come into the Thursday class. And they, I think it's a shyness in kids, but I'm just thinking how, you know, they're so used to not greeting teachers and other people with extending key and making a real connection. And it's so good for them because if they will do it, it just brings them up to kind of a more mature level and just like, oh yeah, I'm making a real contact with another person. So I never give up. I keep trying to get them to do it.
Good. Thank you, Melly. So, you know, bowing super important. I'd like to call on a few other people to talk about bowing as well. Just how it relates to you in your training and how you do it at your dojo. Lillian, would you like to would you like to share?
Sure, Sensei. One haven't I like to share? I'm like you. When I teach the children that come to class, the very first thing I do is go over etiquette. Because unlike Japan, where it is very natural with the bowing and the greeting and stuff, here in the U.S. and Hawaii, it's not part of our lifestyle. kids regularly call adults by their name, which maybe an old timer find very strange. So when they come to the dojo, we spend a lot of that first class talking about and going through the actions of bowing, standing, sitting, greeting, what the showman means, what it's all about, and what I expect out of them in the class. As even though they're coming and they're young, I expect them to sit still and pay attention. And the beautiful part of this for me is that what I usually hear from the parents within a few weeks is that the kids have settled down a lot at home because they're expected to settle down in the class. And they don't know why, but I know why. So does that share enough there?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, going from, I like to say a civilian in a sense, but going to, a martial art, I noticed in Curtis Sensei's first manual here, he refers to Aikido as Budo quite a bit, but that kind of left in the second edition. He didn't refer to it as Budo, but I do distinctly remembering, Toy Sensei being interviewed in Aikido Journal about Aikido is Budo, and Budo is very formal, and we always, when we talk about our dojo, we always say we're a formal dojo. We honor the etiquette of not only from bowing to connecting to the teacher, but to having a proper uniform, clean gi, just basic things like that, you have to have rules, but then once you know the rules, then you can blossom from there. But how I'd like to go to now is Toby Vogel, the chief instructor of Europe. Vogel Sensei, can you give us some insight on your training in Europe on bowing?
Well, thank you, Sensei, for giving me the opportunity to be here. For us, it was quite different. We didn't have all these rules. We had to not make them up ourselves, but we had to get used to it. And I'm sorry, I'm pressing the space bar, but I think you hear it, right?
Yeah, you only have to press it once.
Okay. And so this thing about connection, so creating a connection with the teacher, I noticed that in my children's class, the children might come in and start running around first before we, officially start class. But they do come in and forget to greet the teacher, right? And I noticed. So in our tradition, like even before we met Curtis Sensei, we kind of had we thought if we live up to the rules, people will see how it works, right? But somehow people miss it. So you need to write down some of these rules and instructions about etiquette so that you can teach them, because not everybody is as aware of what's going on. So we kind of made a mistake by saying, well, let's first show them how it works, and hopefully people will follow. And it is more hopefully than, actually that it happened. So yeah, this is how we started off with all these etiquettes. And now we are trying to kind of implement the rules a bit more. But it's, the difficulty is between the doing something because of its being a rule, like, it may feel insincere, or actually understanding why the rule is there. So there's still a small line, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's a good point you said, when Curtis Sensei rewrote this new book, when he added from on the mat to preparing for training, I'll read what he said at number 21, which is the last pointer in preparing for training. Always greet the sensei first upon entering the dojo. In other words, Do not become involved with any other task or conversations before greeting the sensei. You know, that kind of, especially, you know, with kids or teens or even adults. Let me tell you, I am guilty as charged for talking before greeting the sensei because we're busy people. Hey, how are you doing? You know, what's going on? What's, you know, and boom, you know, from walking in the door, you might see somebody on the mat over here, or you might see somebody coming up the stairs in Maui, and you'll greet them. And yes, you can greet them, but don't get caught up in a conversation with them. It might be somebody you haven't seen in a long time. You know, that's just a part of the discipline of training, is having a mindset when you walk in. After you bow, your next thing is going right to the office for us to greet the sensei. And what that does is it harbors, you know, we tend to get distracted so easily, you know, with phones that we have. Ding, a text message. Oh, who's that? You know, when I teach the introductory course, you know, we do you know, Suzuki Sensei would always preach sit tall, stand tall, walk tall. Those are the three things about posture, which in Japanese is shisei. He would constantly go over that. And now when I teach this portion of the class, I of course, you know, we do sitting, standing, of course, then walking. You know, just having people walk a few tatamis and then take a key test. You know, we do that, but then I give them an invisible phone to look at while they're walking, and then I have them try to pass a key test, because you know it's you see it probably in your daily lives, people walking around looking at their phones, and it's got so bad in Hawaii that in Honolulu they had to pass a law. It's against the law to walk and look at your phone. And the reason why was because tourists were getting hit by cars, you know, walk out in front of cars getting hit. So we had to pass a law in Hawaii. That's how bad we're attached to being distracted. You know, turn off your phone for a little bit and you'll start going through withdrawals because we're addicted to it. You know, Lynn Curtis Sensei, who's not here in this class, but you'll see her in the other classes. I always reach out and chat with her a little bit before Sensei's class just to check in on her. And she, you know, made a really good point of parents, when they walk in, you know, to watch their kids, sometimes they're not watching their kids on the mat. They're looking at their phone. You know, we had to put, during testing time, we had to put a little sign that said, don't look at your phone. You know, don't answer your phone. If you need to use your phone, go outside. And it missed it, you know, when this first manual came out. I found it real quick. There was a section in there that gave instructions to adults. Basically, it didn't say adults specifically, but it said if you're watching a class, don't read a book. So back in the day, people were reading books. They didn't have their phones. They'd come to the dojo and crack open a book while their kids were, or their teens were participating in the class. And that's another point, you know, we constantly strive for distraction. You know, we don't want to have any quiet time. And when you're distracted, your mind just starts moving. And that's why I'm, you know, so glad that we have these meditation classes at Maui, that we can actually set time aside to actually go and meditate with other people in a group dynamic. But before we leave bowing, I haven't asked everybody. I see John and Ladini down there. How about Ladini? Do you want to share some information about, you know, your experience in Maui with bowing?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can't hear you.
You can hear me or no?
Oh, I can hear you now. Good.
Okay. I mean, it was completely new to me. It's a very formal tradition that I was unfamiliar with. And even leaving for several years and coming back, it was like learning something new all over again. And just the formality of it, because it's very different from my normal life. I did want to say something about greeting the sensei, because, you know, when I come into the dojo and I bow, I go downstairs. I don't feel comfortable going to the office. You know, sensei's usually busy or there's people in there chatting. So I don't necessarily go in there and bow or you know, acknowledge the sensei until actually he comes on the mat. So, I mean, and we go downstairs and chat, and then I come back up. So, have I been doing it wrong that I should be going in there the whole time?
No, it's okay. I mean, but you know, that's something to look at. You know, why don't you go there? You thought, you know, back in the, you know, in this manual, especially the very first one, it said the office is pretty much off limits. You know, the office is for the sensei only, and if you have official business, you should go in. And that kind of carried over into the etiquette rules. But as you know, Curtis Sensei and Suzuki Sensei really like to be greeted. So maybe now, you know, the next time we have class and you go, you can open it up and maybe walk in the office.
I'll give it a shot.
And give it a shot, right?
Okay.
That's good. That's good. John, how about you?
When I went to the Osaka dojo and I was bowing, they commented that my butt was sticking out. And so I would bow, you know, seiza, and my butt would just angle up, right?
All right.
And they said, "Oh no, you keep that down." So
you were bowing like a Buddhist minister.
I don't know. Anyways,
those of you who don't know, John is a Buddhist minister.
I'm still working on my bows.
Okay, yeah. Good. So that was when you were in Osaka?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Remind me next time I'll work on your bows in class there. I have a good stick to hit you with.
Okay. Thank you, Sensei.
So I noticed Udo and Alexander, your videos are off, but you're more, I'd like to call on, there you are. Udo, please. Share something about bowing. Oh, we can't hear you. There you are.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Great.
So I'm teaching bowing to the kids and the adults, and I'm always trying to tell them that it's not something special, because I have the feeling that we Westerners often think this is very formal, this is very something extra, which in my experience, it's not. You know, it's a greeting and a connecting with your opposite, as we do when we shake hands. And when we shake hands, we don't think it's very special or very formal, but it's a connection. So I try to take this out, this formality thing that we tend to have when we look at Japanese etiquette.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's just a matter of connection. You know, we tend to think of it as bowing as
a ritual. You know, we think it's like a big ritual which it's not. It's just as Sayaka, normal.
Yeah, it's connection, and that's why, you know, Curtis Sensei really wants to see every student before they get on the mat. And you know, I was in his office one time, and he basically, you know, when people come in, they'll come in, and you kind of see everyone's personality come out when they come in. You know, some people are real quick. a sensei, boom, and they don't wait for him. You know, I remember the first time, you know, back when I had moved here to Maui, he had asked me to read the Shokushu, and I had come up, you know, did the formal bows, and then at the very end, I bowed to him, but as soon as I bowed, I came up and pivoted and got off the front stage because I wasn't comfortable being up in front, you know, and afterwards he said, you know, Tracy, when you bow, you need to come up and connect with me before you leave to go back in line. Not you disconnected from me too early. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So now I make a point of it, you know, bowing and coming up, connecting with him, and then leaving. But as people come into the office, you'll see this all the time. Is people bow, pivot, gone. There's no bow, connection, leave. It's, well, I'm out of here. I did my duty. So you have to be careful on that because, you know, that's just running away, you know, disconnecting because you're self-conscious. But the reason Sensei really makes a point of this bowing and at the very beginning to see you, he wants to see your state of mind. He wants to see, oh, are they centered? You know, are they having a bad day? You know, what's their situation? You know, because, you know, Curtis Sensei never does a lesson plan or whatever. I was guilty as charged because, you know, I would go in, you know, as his assistant, I would go into his dressing room, help him get dressed. And after class, I'd always go, you know, Sensei, you might want to do this, this, and this. Of course, totally against the rules in the etiquette. Never suggest things to Sensei. Guilty as charged. I did it all the time. And he said he would base his classes on basically how he felt people came into the dojo. I see that person's having trouble. Maybe we should work on this. Or, you know, it was not, I'm going to teach this tonight, no matter what. You know, he often, you know, you see him after about, you know, 15 minutes before class is going to start, he's meditating in his office. And that's basically, you know, he's just preparing for class, you know. And even so, I've seen people, you know, who come in late, sneak in and look at him and see him, and then go, oh, and leave. When actually, even if you see Sensei meditating, don't say anything, just bow to him, connect, and leave. You know, even if he's sitting in there meditating, you can always go to the door and bow to him, connect, and leave. Not just peek in, oh, he's meditating, and leave. Because half the time he opens his eyes and goes, who is that? You know, you want to know who it was. So that's just another pointer, you know, to do even when you come in late, you want to still connect with the teacher. Now, of course, you know, we have another thing that when, you know, if you are late, you know, he doesn't get too upset. He'd rather have you come and be late than not come at all. But when you get dressed and come up, you know, just wait for him to wave you on the mat. And that's pretty standard. Most places, you don't just walk on the dojo after the class has started. With that being said, Udo, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand a little bit. We can't hear you. Got to unmute.
Oh, sorry. It should be on mute.
Did you have a question though?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. About the thing that John said, this is a problem I also have commonly here in Stuttgart, that people are lifting their butt, you know, some formal things, like lifting their butt, or when they bow, they go down and they clap the mat, especially the children, or they lean on their hands when they bow. So I'm trying to teach them just connect with the ground with their hands and not lean on their hands. Or when they go up, they come up and then they go back, you know, the key goes back. So I try to to incorporate the bowing into the Aikido thinking and Aikido training?
Sure. I mean, you know, we come parallel, and I know John, and I know a lot of Buddhist ministers their head will touch the mat, you know, because that's their way of displaying humility. Now in Aikido, we don't do that. We come at, you know, basically parallel to the deck. And I always tell people, think about touching rice paper. When you touch the rice paper with your hands, you should be able to pull it out. If you're putting weight on your hands, of course, you can't pull the rice paper out. That's just one aspect I do from teaching, so the butt doesn't come up. But that's something, you know, we cover that at headquarters quite a bit, you know, making sure bowing, you know, sitting stays up properly. And that just goes back to the sitting. Once people learn how to sit properly, then you can move on to how to bow correctly. Alexander, I haven't got to you. I know you're on the bottom right-hand side for me. Do you want to share some things about bowing?
Good morning, or good evening. How are you?
Good morning for you, though.
Yeah. I'm still in the darkness, so you can't see me, but I'm here. Thank you for having this class for us as well.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Anyway, regarding bowing, I really don't know if I can share anything that hasn't been said yet. It's quite natural for me, I guess. I've been doing bowing since I was 10 years old. And I've been including it into my daily life, I mean, outside of dojo as well. And sometimes I get like questions from people that are not aware of what I did it and where it comes from. Then I get some opportunity to explain, you know, also to persons which are not the person of training, what is it about and why is it so natural for me, for example, to come into an office and to bow. So for me, for me now, after all these years, it's more natural than shaking the hand. I never really liked hand shaking. I don't know why, but bowing is, I think, showing that, you know, I think it's easy to extend the hand, but to lower the upper body, it takes more of a mind shift at that moment. Something.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I remember training. When I first started training, I was getting in the habit of bowing because it was, of course, foreign to me. And I didn't start training till later in my life. Aikido, I was 29 when I started. So when I remember first learning to bow, I remember walking into stores, opening the door and bowing and going, oh shit, I'm at a store, not at the dojo. You know, I was just memorizing it over and over again. And I can't tell you how many times I must have bowed going into a store, just because I was building the habit. With that being said, there is one other person. I cannot pronounce your name. Spella?
I call her Fu.
Where do you train? And how do you pronounce your name?
Yeah, Spela.
Spella, okay.
I trained with Alexander.
Oh, excellent.
From Slovenia, yes.
Oh,
Thank
nice.
you, Sensei.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. What is your experience with bowing at the dojo?
Well, for me, it's also like Alexander, very interesting when I'm outside of dojo. And even if I don't bow, when I'm in a situation and I'm very grateful, I feel the connection is still the same. So I like this very much.
Oh, good.
The etiquette from the dojo goes outside of, like in everyday life.
Right. Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I don't know how many people have gotten the new book or not. it has changed in some aspects. It's a little bit thicker. They've added and subtracted some things. I know that Curtis Sensei did want me to basically state that, you know, he's come across people who have borrowed sections from the book, and that's okay. He has no problem with people borrowing, just that it is copyrighted, and he would like you to ask permission if you do want to use it. I've never heard him say no, but apparently there was some groups that kind of borrowed it verbatim and pawned it off as theirs. And that's okay too. That's, you know, we were joking about that on Saturday, and that is one of the best compliments you can ever get. So with that being said, I don't have any more to cover tonight on bowing. I'd like to save some of the other sections for the next Monday. Does anybody else have any specifics on the manual? If you have any specific question on the manual at all, you can email Curtis Sensei or myself if you have my email, and we can specifically cover it in one of these classes. Otherwise, I'll open up the floor to, we'll just go from how I see people. Lillian, do you have anything to add, or do you have any questions about anything we've covered?
I actually got some really nice comments here that I wrote down that I'm going to remember when I go back to classes. You know, there's always a new way to try to teach something, you know,
Sure.
and to get the message across. So I'm really grateful that I got to take some notes here and can use this. And I'm guilty of not necessarily bowing to Curtis Sensei first thing when I come into a dojo, especially Maui dojo, because his office was on the side, and I always feel like I'm intruding. When he's on the big island, he comes in the door, he feels the doorway, I run over, I say hello. But on Maui, I'm always a little bit intimidated. But thank you so much for this, because this is going to be really great. I can see that.
Oh, good, good. Thanks, Lillian, for coming. Vogel Sensei, do you have anything? Oh, you're muted. Good.
Not at this.
You're muted.
It's all perfect at this point.
Okay.
We have to train a bit more. Yeah.
So Tracy Sensei, I have one thing that I would be interested.
Sure.
And I would like to hear a little bit more about Suzuki Sensei and Suzuki Sensei's history and maybe teaching style. And
sure.
That's, I feel that I have some lack of information there.
Okay. Okay. I'll be sure and cover that. Actually, I was going to cover that next week. You know, I was really fortunate because when I moved here to Maui, I moved to Maui in 2003. I lived really close to Suzuki Sensei. My house, the house I rented was about a block from his house. So he gave me his P.O. box key, and I would go get his mail every day. And every day I would, you know, bring up his mail about the same time, and he'd go, "Come in." And he'd take me out to his patio, and we'd sit down, and he'd tell me stories about, and of course, sometimes he'd repeat the same story, and he would go, "I know I'm repeating this story, but that's because it's important, and I want you to remember it." I'd be like, "Hi, Sensei, no problem." And I used to write down a lot of, I have them written down. And I have, you know, I have pretty much a big envelope of all of his note cards. So anytime he taught a seminar, he would take out a note card and read from the note card verbatim. And Curtis Sensei hated it. He hated Suzuki Sensei's note cards with a passion. In fact, he would go into Suzuki Sensei's office and go, "Sensei, can we just not use note cards? We don't care exactly what you're saying. We just want to connect with you." And he would go, "No, Chris, note cards are important." So how I keep everything straight. And I remember when he gave it to me, he said, I'm giving you these note cards, Tracy, because Curtis Sensei doesn't like these note cards, but always use them when you teach a class. Always use note cards. I'd be like, hi, Sensei, no problem. I'll do it. Of course, I do sometimes keep notes aside, and I have his note cards, and I'll break them out over the week, and I'll pick out some good ones, and we'll share. I'll share them with you guys so you can kind of take a gander at his state, because Suzuki Sensei typed. He didn't handwrite his note cards. No. He had a typewriter. He typed out his note cards on this old like hunt and peck style of typing he had. He couldn't type regularly. Hunt and pecked. He'd do his and he'd roll out his neck, and then he'd put it down and go, yeah, that's what I'm going to teach. So that's the kind of style he had. He was very formal. He taught at the police department as a detective, and I'll tell you a quick story. I love this story because Suzuki Sensei would interview people at the police department, and he would say, one day he would call in a detective and say, okay, what I'm going to do is you're going to go into my office. I want you to memorize everything in the office, come back out, I'm going to ask you questions about it. And the recruiter, whoever it was, the new guy, would go into his office, study his office for about 3 or 4 minutes. Suzuki Sensei, time's up, come on out here. And that recruit would be sitting there waiting for him to say, ask the question, Sensei, I've got it memorized. And he'd look at him and go, was my window open or closed? And they'd be like, yeah, I didn't look at his window. I was looking at his desk. I was looking at his bookshelf. But it was this way of testing awareness, Did you have the awareness to look to see if the window was open? He said every time everybody failed that one, every time. But he had all these, like Curtis Sensei said, he was a big time practical joker. He loved jokes. He loved comedy, and you wouldn't know that because he came across so serious, and as some people said, he was really scary. He threw. People would say, yeah, you know why Curtis Sensei's knees are all messed up? Because Suzuki Sensei tortured the hell out of him, by throwing him all kinds of ways. And Suzuki Sensei had an injury to his right shoulder, I believe. Yeah, his right shoulder. So he did everything with his left hand because he had hurt his shoulder in a shionage years and years ago. It never healed properly. So he always did left side techniques. Rarely did he do right side. He always did left side because it was always his good shoulder. So Curtis Sensei always got taken on only one side. He didn't balance himself. So he always got the same jarring effect on his knees because Suzuki Sensei would throw for break falls. And I know this because when I was his uke, I was Suzuki Sensei's uke during the police classes. And sometimes Suzuki Sensei would forget. And even though nowadays we don't throw for break falls too often, he would forget and hold on to me. And I would fly through the air into a break fall, and then I'd pop back up because I loved it. And he would go, sorry, and go on with teaching the class. That's just, his way, his way of transmitting. Aikido was just so connected, so on the spot. But I digress, I'll cover some more of that next week, I promise. Ladini, do you have anything to comment or state before we depart?
No, it was nice to have the refresher. Thank you on the etiquette.
Okay. All right. And Melly could add something if you want to the class.
Well, I just would like to say you're making me think about how I thought that Suzuki Sensei was very, very formal a lot. And I was scared. I was scared of him when I started Aikido. And as I got to know him over the years, he was a very loving man, and he really wasn't standing on ceremony, and he wanted you to be courteous. He wanted you to follow dojo etiquette. But as long as he saw that that was sincere in your heart, he wasn't picky at all about anything. He was loving and open.
Great, thank you so much. Alexander, did you have a question?
Yes, actually. You know, I've been following several traditions in my life, and most of them kind of came from Japan or arose in Japan. And I had quite different approaches to bowing from Seiza, from different teachers. And I noticed that you mentioned that the butt should not be raised while bowing. I know that it's explained also with keeping 1 point while you're doing it, but is there any other historical reason why we shouldn't do that?
Basically, you know, Curtis Sensei, of course, Toy Sensei always teach all movement begins and ends in the 1 point in the lower abdomen. And if you are connected, you know, from your 1 point and move directly from your 1 point, and always remember, Aikido is about minimalization of movement. No unnecessary movements should be happening. So if you're bowing, the hinge is at your hips, right at the 1 point, and that's all that moves. So anything else, if your head goes lower, that's extra movement because that's coming from your chest area. If your hands aren't sliding off if you're picking your hands up and putting them on the mat, that's another aspect that they always kind of get people on. But always remember, Aikido is about minimalization of movement, and all movement begins and ends in the 1 point.
Right, thank you.
Questions, but yes. Fincher, do you have anything, my friend?
Yes, I would. You know, when you were talking about the bowing in and connecting with Sensei, it made me think about, you know, these classes and when he asks for questions like you're asking now.
Sure.
That's another way of connecting it. I really compare the two. He is delighted with questions.
Oh, yes.
No matter if they're, you know, where they come from. So it's sort of like connecting with Sensei.
Yes.
So I would, you know, you're saying, you know, take this opportunity to come in and bow to your Sensei when you first come into the dojo. I'd say the same thing with these classes, is that, you know, we're not really bowing in, but the way you connect with Sensei in these types of classes would be to ask a nice, you know, to ask what's on your mind. Just share what's on your mind, and that's a form of connection.
Yeah, I agree. And questions, if you look at questions, questions are a gift to the group, because some people might have that same question. And if you think of it as giving rather than, I don't want to look stupid, it's a whole different thing. You know, think about giving a question rather than asking, in a sense of, oh, I hope I don't sound stupid, because there aren't any stupid questions, because it really gives a chance, an opportunity for Curtis Sensei to really connect with you. And, you know, it reminds me of, I remember before I had moved to Maui, I came here with a group from Arizona where I was training. There was about 15 of us. And of course, I wanted to be called up front. That was me. I wanted to be up front with Sensei getting tested. And I, of course, was not very good at keeping 1 point back in the day. Not that I'm any better now, but I was failing the test. Every time I get up, fail the test. And up front, I'm failing the test miserably. And Curtis Sensei kind of noticed somebody in the audience was kind of smiling and laughing a little bit that I was failing the test. And he kind of spun around and said, listen, this is where you want to be. You want to be up front in class, in front of everyone, because this is something he'll never forget, and he'll learn it. And that's the same way about asking a question. When you ask the question, guaranteed you're going to remember that answer. Guaranteed you're going to know, oh yeah, and you'll never forget it as long as you'll train Aikido or maybe in your life. You'll never forget. So I always think of it as an opportunity to give back to the group, but also to as an opportunity to grow and develop. Thanks for pointing that out, Fincher. And Sayaka, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, regarding the question, asking question, I remember in Japan, nobody asks questions. Japanese people are not familiar with asking questions, but every time in Tohei Sensei's class, always he asks everybody if anybody has questions every time. And it's really rare for Japanese teachers. And nobody liked it in Japan, but I think it's good opportunity to learn something. I realized after I moved to Maui. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks. Thank you. Spella, do you have anything? No, you're good? Okay, great. And John, do you have anything? You're good too, John?
Hi, I'm good too, Sensei. Thank you.
Okay. There's one thing I want to I don't know, you know, we're in the midst of a pandemic, you know, with this totally unfortunate thing. And, you know, Marcus Aurelius actually died. You know, he was a Stoic. He was a emperor of Rome. Marcus Aurelius was. And he actually died during a pandemic as a result of a pandemic. And he wrote something that came across my desk today. And I thought I'd just read it in closing. It basically says, you know, we can choose to see this as a tremendous opportunity. This is a moment to be heroic, to think about others, to serve, to prepare, to keep calm, to reassure, and to protect. This is a time to reevaluate our priorities, to ask ourselves what's important and what we're working towards. So with that, thank you all so much for coming to the class. I hope to see you next Monday. And I'll just close. Domo arigato gozaimashita. Thank you so much. And we'll close the meeting.